Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and I'm excited to have Dana Stabenow. I'm sorry. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's Stabenow, but don't worry, nobody ever gets it right.
I should have asked you that before. Dana is an Edgar Award-winning and New York Times bestselling author of crime fiction and thriller books. And her latest novel, Spoils of the Dead, will be published on February 4th. Really excited to have Dana here on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here and to see you.
Yes, the new way, right? The new Zoom way.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey that led you to becoming an author?
Um, oh God, I feel like I've told this story 9 million times. Sorry, you caught me a little flat-footed. I was born in Alaska. I've lived there all my life. It seems natural to me to write about it. And of course, it's a big place. So I move my characters all over it, exploiting every bit of it that I possibly can. Probably the reason that I write crime fiction is because I was raised in a really small town called Seldovia. It's across the bay from where I live now. There's no road to it. You have to fly or you have to take a boat. And we didn't have our own police. So when there was trouble in the town, we'd have to call the Alaska State Troopers to come in. At that point, they were stationed in Ninilchik. And, in a small town where there's only like 300 or 400 people, there's not a lot to do. So when you hear that the Alaska State Troopers are coming to town, naturally, all the kids go out to the airport to see him land in his plane and climb out. So that's what we did. And I remember one time something pretty bad happened in the town and the trooper came, and I remember him getting out of that plane and getting out of that plane and getting out of that plane. He was a very tall man and dressed in the very wonderful state trooper uniform with the smoky hat. And I think at that moment, I didn't know it at that time, but I think at that moment I was going to start writing crime fiction at some point in my life.
Well, and were you a fan of the genre, reading it before then, or
Honestly,
no?
no. I'm sorry to say no. I didn't read crime fiction for years. My mother read a lot of crime fiction and she kept trying to get me into it. And I think probably just in, that perverse way that kids have, no, I'm not going to do it because my mom does it. I think I was in my early 20s before she managed to finally force me to read The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey, in which Josephine Tey breaks all of the crime fiction conventions, and which I didn't know until I'd read a lot more in the genre later in my life. And then, of course, there was no looking back. I didn't read anything but for a long time.
And how long did it take you? What was the driving force that led you to try to write your own book?
Well, God, I mostly, geez, you want me to tell the truth, I suppose. Mostly, basically, I was just having a good time in my 20s. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline was being built and everybody my age wanted to go see what was going on. So I got a job on the pipeline and that led to a job on the slope in the oil fields. And then I got to a point where I thought, okay, it's time to fish or cut bait. I had an undergraduate degree in journalism. So what do I want to do? Do I be a journalist? For one thing, it didn't pay. And crime fiction was going to pay anymore. And I thought, well, okay. So I went back to school, I got my master's degree. And my goal was that I was going to publish a novel before I ran out of my savings. And I just barely made it.
Oh,
and
wow.
It wasn't crime fiction, it was science fiction. I didn't write my first crime fiction novel, the first Kate Shuyak novel, I didn't publish until after I had published 2 fiction novels.
Oh, wow. And what was your first book that was published? Then it was a science fiction was the first one?
Yeah, it's called Second Star.
Oh.
It's about about colonizing low Earth orbit.
Oh. And so for those for listeners who aren't familiar with your work, can you describe your writing style, your books, your crime fiction, your thriller books to us?
Well, I have said to friends of mine, don't put up a tombstone for me after I die. But if you do, this is what I want on it. She wrote with vigor.
Like it.
I like You Are There books. I like books that I can climb into like a time machine or a traveling machine that will transport me to that world. And that is exactly the way I try to write. Somebody once told me in a not very approving tone that I certainly included a lot of detail in my books. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what I like to read. So that's what I write.
And how many books do you have published so far?
Oh man, I think it's about 37.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So can you tell us about your latest book, Spoils of the Dead? What's it about?
Spoils of the Dead is a return to characters that were last published, I think it's 16 years ago now.
Oh.
And I can't really write a book until I come up with a halfway decent plot. And so I had stumbled across this book about an archaeological find. And I thought, what could I use that for in the way of creating a plot? And of course, immediately I thought of when I was working for the oil companies for BP. And I thought about all the environmentalists that they had up there on staff and how they weren't much in the way of environmentalists. They were there basically just to sign off on everything that the oil companies did. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be fun if there was an archaeologist that a natural resource extraction company would, hire to do exactly the same thing? And it took off from there. And then I wanted to relocate these. It's standard operating procedure for Alaska State Troopers to move around the state. They don't have they don't stay in the same place all the time. They move them around. And Liam, had the state trooper character featured in Spoils of the Dead, had been in Newenham, the fictional town of Newenham, for years. And I thought, okay, moving. There's other personal stuff going on in their lives that help move him as well. But that was the main thing. I wanted to move him.
What was it like to revisiting characters that you hadn't worked for 16 years or?
Well, the first thing I had to do was go back and skim through all the books to remember what he was doing. And all the characters. But because it took a lot longer to write than I remembered to begin a series, because, well, and I've learned stuff now. It isn't like I'm brand new to the game anymore. I know there are certain things that you have to tick off on the list. And you, for one, have to create, the most important thing is that you have to create some kind of a decent supporting cast. A supporting cast in a book, it's not the main character. I have never believed. It's not, certainly not only the main character that sells a book to a reader. It is the supporting cast. The supporting cast gets a backstory. Every member of the supporting cast gets a backstory. I don't care if it's one line or if it's a subplot that runs the entire line of the book, you have to have that supporting cast in place. Well, they just don't miraculously appear. So it took a lot more work than I thought it was going to. And then, of course, I have to describe the setting, which is also very important to me, because I think once you understand your setting, then you know who lives there and you can figure what to get up to.
Yeah, and Alaska's such a big part of your book, so it's kind of like reading a Michael Connolly in L.A. The Harry Bosch. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The setting is, Alaska, in the Alaska books, the setting, Alaska is probably one of the main characters. I'm not even probably. Alaska is one of the main characters of all the books set in Alaska.
Yeah, it's like the last Western frontier kind of. Like I've never been there yet, but
Come on up.
I got it coming up after the pandemic. I have to go up there.
Yeah, not right away, but come up when you can.
Yeah. And speaking of the pandemic, how has that affected your writing, the process or anything?
It's been sort of a seesaw. At first I thought to myself, well, I work at home, I'm self-employed. I'm actually still getting paid for my work, because all people have to do is go to Amazon and download a Kindle, or order it up from a good bookstore that ships. And I thought, this was a pandemic for me, I thought, in my arrogance. Well, it turns out that I need people just as much as everybody else does. And along about May, when the real serious lockdown started, it was so hard. I was extreme, one word at a time, even more slowly than I think I ordinarily do. It took a lot longer to write a page or a chapter and to finish this book. I was surprised. The only thing that I can compare it to is I felt, in some respects, a lot like the way I felt after 9/11. was also a very difficult time to write because, hey, I'm not inventing a cure for cancer here. It's
Mm,
kind of hard when all of this horribleness is going on around you to convince yourself that you're doing something good in the world by just writing a book.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it is hard on the psyche. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of writers, and they've all experienced that too. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, hard not to affect us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, and so, what are you working on now? Are you continuing on the series? Or you have a new series coming on? What's next up for you?
I'm working on a book called I'm writing a historical series that is set
Oh.
in Alexandria in the time of Cleopatra. It features the Eye of Isis, which is the Queen Cleopatra's private investigator slash enforcer.
Hmm.
And I've already written the first book in the series. I think it came out 2 years ago, but don't hold my feet to the fire on that. It's called Death and I, and I'm working on the second one now. I'm very close to finishing the second one now. It's called Disappearance of a Scribe.
Oh wow! And what's is the research process? Is your process to writing a thriller versus a historical? Is it a lot different? Is it a lot more work required?
Um, well, if I set a book in Alaska, I still have to do research, but
Mm.
I will admit that the research has increased to an order of magnitude when you're writing a book that's 1,000 years in the past, halfway around the world.
Yeah.
I did manage to squeak in a trip to Egypt just before the pandemic hit last December. And I mean, you talk about cutting it short,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But for the
And
rest, it's been all books. It's been, I mean, you should see my research shelf. Oh my God. Shelves, plural.
and what's your writing process like then? Do you like when you actually do your research, do you have to outline your books, or are you like a seat of the pants type of writer?
Um, Mostly, I fell into the habit of writing outlines because I used to be contractually required by my publisher to provide an outline, and they would pay X amount of dollars on the when you submitted that outline and they approved it.
Oh.
And basically, it's just economic security for them. They want to see if you're actually going to, they want to take a look that they're actually going to write you a check for.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I kind of got in the habit of it, but I don't outline extensively as like, say, somebody like Jeffrey Deaver, who I heard once say writes 80-page outlines. Generally, what I do, I'll write I'll guess that there'll be 15 or 20 chapters in a book, and then I'll write a paragraph per chapter saying what happens in each of those chapters. Now, that is not to say that I follow the outline slavishly because I almost never do. Something really happens 1/3 to 2/3 of the way through the book where it's like, oh, all is revealed. And then the story pretty much takes off on its own. And
Yeah.
the sooner that happens, the better.
Yeah, that's what I always figured. Like they say, oh, if I have too outlined, it takes away from the fun. Well, it's like, well, it's not like it's etched in stone. It could still grow and change as you write.
You have to allow your characters room.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're really lucky and your characters take off, they start living their own lives. And basically, you're just scrambling to keep up. That is, in my opinion, the preferred outcome.
Yeah. And what do you use? I always ask this question. What do you use to write? Is it like Microsoft Word or something?
Laptop. Oh, Pages on.
Pa-
I drive a Mac, so
Oh yeah, Pages.
yeah.
Oh cool. Okay, you're the first one that's usually it's a
Well,
Word or some other software.
it's really cool.
He's like throwing me
Yeah,
off.
except nobody else uses Pages, it seems like, except for me. So whenever I submit it, I have to export it to a Word doc to send it on.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, I've been, I'm on a Mac too. And recently now they changed to you don't have the Word anymore. It doesn't work with whatever version I am now, this big source. So now I've been using Pages now for the last few months. So I like it, but
I like it too.
yeah,
I like it better in Word, or
yeah.
Bill Gates.
And so then when you get the edits back as a Word doc, then you bring it back into Pages.
Um, Generally, it comes as a PDF.
Oh, okay.
The edit comes back as the PDF, and I don't have to explain that to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting,
That
interesting. Cool.
I do that. The editing comes PDF, and the page proofs come as a PDF. And once I got used to it, I have to say I love it. I mean, I can't even remember how much money I used to have to spend on printing out stuff and mailing it in for the postage.
Mm.
I mean, it was a God. I spent a lot of money on that, and it's great not to do that now.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially like sending out this querying, and you had to pay for this postage back, and yeah,
Mhm.
that was
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah,
I would
and
have said you were too young to know that.
yeah, well, I've read. Yeah, and so what do you still find time to read? You still enjoy reading crime fiction and thrillers, or are you too busy?
It's my I reading has always been my primary recreational activity.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm reading. I have a book going through. Not all. I don't only read crime fiction. I pretty much read everything. I read a lot of nonfiction,
Mhm.
partly because I love history, and also partly because you never know where you're going to find an you want to write about.
Uh, and are you going to continue on with the Liam Campbell series eventually, or?
Honestly, it depends on how well this one sells.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know that my publisher will want to continue it. I hope so. I
Mhm.
do have some more stories to tell in that series, but we'll see. I'm sorry to be so hard nosed about it, but you
Yeah,
know, it's how I make my living. So
yeah. It's the working writers world, right? I mean, it's it is what it is. Well, so Spoils of the Dead comes out on February 4th. So if people like the book, you better go out and get it. So the publisher order some more.
did I accidentally put you on retainer there, Alan?
Yeah, no pressure there, right?
No.
But anyway, so that comes out February 4th. And where can the listeners find out more about you? You have a website or?
Yeah, stabenow.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed talking to you about your work and your books.
Make sure I get a link so I can post it to the Dana Maniacs page. They'll want to hear.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll send that to you.
Okay.
All
Thanks,
right. Thank
Alan.
you.
Bye.
All right. Bye now.